Hey guys, tonight we're delving into a time filled with plagues, punishments, and pottage. We're about to uncover the stark contrast between our modern comforts and the harsh realities of the Middle Ages. So, forget the castles and chivalry that Hollywood loves to show. The reality, you're about to realize how fortunate you are to be living in this era. So, before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Please drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I always find it fascinating to see where everyone is watching from. Now, dim the lights and consider turning on a fan for a bit of soft background noise. Let's gently slip into tonight's journey together. Congrats, you've just woken up in the year 1325. The good news is you're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas. Your bed is a half-rotted straw mattress packed with hay and bugs. It smells like a barn floor because 3 months ago it was a barn floor. There's no memory foam, no pillows, and no Egyptian cotton sheets. Just a wool blanket that hasn't been washed since last winter, and now weighs about as much as a small cow, thanks to all the grime. You blink awake as a distant church bell begins to clang. That's your alarm clock, the medieval version. It's louder and somehow even less forgiving. Your home is a small wooden hut with one room, no windows, and an open concept layout that includes your family, some livestock, and all the insects you can imagine. The smell? It's a fragrant mix. It's a lovely blend of stale beer, sweat, goats, and something you hope isn't mold, but deep down, you know it probably is. Scented candles don't exist yet, and even if they did, they'd melt into your dirt floor. You try to stretch, but instantly regret it. The air is freezing, and your joints are already aching. The lack of hygiene in medieval life means you're constantly at risk of illness and discomfort. You're 22 years old, which in medieval times puts you around middle age. Your spine creaks like an old wooden door. Your knees crackle like a sack of stones being jostled by a confused peasant. Getting out of bed is a gamble. The floor is either damp from last night's rain, thanks to the leaky thatched roof, or crusty from something your neighbor's chicken left behind. Either way, your bare feet are now part of the local ecosystem. And as for privacy, what's that? Your entire family, and maybe even a cousin who just never went home, are all waking up beside you. There's no bedroom, no curtains, no alone time. Everything is shared. Welcome to mornings in medieval Europe, where you're about to realize the luxury of personal space we often take for granted. And this is just how your day starts. It only gets worse from here. You've made it out of your medieval haystack of horror. Well done. Now nature calls, and not politely. It's more of a scream than a whisper. This is when you start missing modern bathroom. No toilet, no seat, no paper, no flush. Not even a grumpy plunger sitting quietly in the corner. In the 14th century, relieving yourself was a strange mix of adventure, social awkwardness, and sometimes a small public spectacle. If you're a peasant, your bathroom is probably a wooden bucket out back. It's already full because Uncle Wolfstan had a rough night with some questionable turnip. The smell is biblical. You hold your breath, handle your business, and then comes the grand finale. You toss it into the street. Yes, the street. You're supposed to shout something like "Guardiola" first. That's old French for "watch out below." But honestly, no one ever moves fast enough. Medieval streets are open sewers, a lovely flowing mix of human waste, animal droppings, and mystery fluids that you're about to be grateful you don't have to navigate in your daily life. Suppose you're lucky enough to live in a town with public latrine. Congrats. You get to sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers in a cramped outhouse. Privacy is a myth. Ventilation is a cruel joke. You might try some small talk, but whatever you do, don't breathe deeply. As for toilet paper, doesn't exist. Most folks wipe with straw, leaves, moss, scraps of cloth, or, if they're treating themselves, a piece of wool. Some people use nothing at all. That might explain why handshakes weren't popular just yet. Now, if you're thinking, well, what if I live in a castle? That must be better. Kind of. You might get a garderobe, a hole in the castle wall that drops your waist straight into the moat. Clever idea, right? Except your enemies know this too. Yes, sometimes attackers would climb in through the waist chute. Talk about sneaking in the back door. So whether you're a farmer or a noble, going to the bathroom in the Middle Ages is a humiliating, cold, public, dangerous, and always disgusting experience. One slip on a wet stone path, and you're face first in the worst leftovers of humanity. And you still haven't brushed your teeth. You made it through the toilet situation. Feels like you earned a reward. A nice breakfast, something hot, tasty, and comforting? Sorry, this is medieval Europe. Nothing here is comforting. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is a sad event. No eggs, Benedict. No fresh coffee. No avocado toast. You squat or sit by the fire with a wooden bowl filled with something that looks like it came off the bottom of a muddy boot. Say hello to pottage. Pottage is a thick, sticky stew made from whatever you can scavenge. Grains, root vegetables, maybe a few beans if you're lucky. It's been simmering in the same pot for days, sometimes weeks. New ingredients are just dumped in on top. It's not a recipe. It's more of a slow-moving edible science project. On the side, you get a piece of bread so hard it could stop an arrow. Made from coarse rye or barley flour, it's often bulked up with sawdust, ground acorns, or other creative fillers. Because wheat is a luxury only the rich can afford. This loaf isn't your friend. You don't slice it. You negotiate with it. And drinks? No orange juice. No oat milk latte. You're starting the day with beer. Yes, beer at 6 in the morning. Why? Because the water is full of parasites and filth. Weak ale is safer. It has low alcohol and a higher chance of not killing you. Even kids drink it. No one likes it, but it's better than getting sick. Meat or cheese, that's reserved for Sundays or Saint Feast days, and only if your local lord is feeling extra generous. Most peasants don't eat meat more than a few times a year. As for fresh fruit, you'll only have some when it's in season and not already fermented into wine. And spices? Forget about it unless you're royalty. A single pinch of pepper costs more than what you earn in a month. Salt is so precious it's often kept under lock and key. So you chew on gritty bread, gulp down your weak medieval beer, and try not to dwell on the rat that may have taken a few nibbles out of your porridge last night. Breakfast doesn't energize you, it just happens to you. And now that you're properly underfed, it's time to start working like your life depends on it, because it does. So, you've eaten your sad little medieval meal, and now it's time to get dressed. Not that it'll help. Your entire wardrobe consists of exactly one outfit. One single outfit. It's a rough wool tunic or a linen shift that you've worn every day for months, maybe even years. There's no such thing as seasonal fashion. There's just one thing. Wear this until it falls apart or gives you a fungal infection. Underwear? Optional. If you're lucky, you have a linen under tunic. If you're not lucky, well, you're going full commando under layers of scratchy, sweaty wool, all lovingly stitched together by someone who probably had no idea what a seam was supposed to look like. And there's no washing machine, no soap, no dry cleaner, so your clothes are stiff, stained, and smell like a compost heap marinated in pig slop. Even if you wanted to wash them, good luck. You'd need to haul water from the nearest river, heat it over a fire, scrub your tunic with ashes or lye, then hang it up to dry in the sun, which shows up maybe 3 days a year. And don't even get me started on shoes. If you own any, they're made of untreated leather, barely held together with crude stitching, and offer as much arch support as a damp leaf. Most peasants go barefoot, through mud, through dung, and over medieval landmines like sharp rocks and puddles of disease. This leads us to one very itchy truth. Your skin hates you. You itch constantly. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs live rent-free on your body. Everyone has them, nobles, monks, kids. Everyone's a walking insect motel, and no one escapes it. You'll be scratching your armpit with a wooden spoon while chatting with the local priest, and no one will even raise an eyebrow. Your skin is raw from constant rubbing. Your scalp is a battlefield of bug bite, and if you develop a rash, too bad. There's no dermatologist, no ointments, no one to tell you, yeah, that's scabies. You keep going. And if you're lucky enough not to get an infection, congratulations. That rash is just your new roommate for the next 6 months. So now that you're dressed in discomfort and fully wrapped in suffering, it's time to head outside and work yourself into the ground. But before that, let's talk about your morning smile. Except you don't smile. In the Middle Ages, smiling was a risky business, not emotionally, but in terms of one's teeth. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no floss. The concept of oral hygiene is about as popular as regular bathing, which is to say, not at all. Some people might chew on a twig or rinse with vinegar or wine, but for the most part, your teeth are entirely on their own, and they're losing the battle. And it's not just your teeth. The idea of a daily bath is a luxury reserved for the wealthy. For most peasants, a bath is a rare event, often tied to a religious holiday or a change in the weather. By your mid-20s, your smile looks like it belongs in a haunted crypt. Cavities are common, gums are swollen, and those aren't just food stains, that's decay. You've got more rot in your mouth than a medieval root cellar. Sugar is starting to appear among the wealthy, imported at a high cost and primarily used in elaborate cakes or to flaunt status. If you're a noble, congrats. You get to rot your teeth faster. If you're a peasant, it'll happen more slowly with gritty porridge, tough bread, and years of chewing things your jaw was never meant to process. Toothaches? Get used to them. They're like the weather, always there in the background. That constant, grinding pain might push you to pray, drink, or yank the tooth out yourself with whatever tool is handy. And yes, that was the actual treatment. There were no dentists, but there were barber surgeons. The same guy who cuts your hair might also be yanking your molar out by candlelight using an iron hook with zero anesthesia. If the tooth gets infected, I hope you enjoy fevers, because without antibiotics, it could become sepsis and kill you. That's right. What sends us to the pharmacy today could have sent you to the grave in the 1300s. There were no dentists, no hospitals, no pharmacies. Just the hope that your body could fight off the infection or the grim acceptance of your fate. And socially, there's no comfort there either. Kissing, good luck. Halitosis, bad breath, is universal. If you're single, no one's judging your smile. They're judging your land, your livestock, and your work ethic. In short, your mouth is a war zone, and it's not winning. Now that your teeth are throbbing and your gums are inflamed, it's time to head out because your real job, the one that will break your back, is just getting started. Time to work. Except there's no office, no desk, no coffee break, and absolutely no hope for promotion. Your job, if you're like 90% of the population, is simple. Don't die while working for someone else's comfort. You're a peasant. Congratulations. That means you work land owned by a lord who probably doesn't even remember your name. And there's no hope of changing your station in life. If you're born a peasant, you'll die a peasant. The only way to improve your lot is through marriage, inheritance, or the rare chance to prove yourself in battle and earn a knighthood. You rise with the sun and stop only when it disappears behind the trees. Your tools are basic: a wooden hoe, a rusty sickle, and whatever bones you haven't already broken. There's no weekend, no PTO, no clocking out. Just dawn to dusk, 6 days a week. Sunday is off, but only if you're not harvesting, repelling raiders, or desperately praying for that infected toe to stop turning black. The work is brutal. Fields are plowed by hand or, if you're incredibly fortunate, with an ox. You dig ditches, sow seeds, weed endlessly, and haul water until your back bends like a crescent moon. No one asks if you're tired. No one cares how your mental health is doing. And if you're a woman, surprise, you don't just do field work. You also raise the children. If you're a woman, your day doesn't end in the field. Now it's time to clean, cook, spin wool, feed the animals, and pretend your husband's lice problem isn't slowly crawling over to your side of the bed. As for the kids, they start helping out by age 5. There's no school, no toys, just a tiny wooden rake and a dream of surviving the flu. And if you're not one of the many working the land, you may be a blacksmith, a tanner, or a cooper. Great. That means you spend your days surrounded by fire, chemicals, or rotting animal guts in poorly ventilated sheds. The pay is just enough to stay alive. The perk? Occasional bleeding. If you break a bone, tough luck. Get a fever? Warm beer and keep moving. You can't afford to stop, not even for a day. Because if you stop working, you stop eating. And if you stop eating, medieval Europe already has a plan. You're replaced. And if you fall ill or get injured, there's no doctor to turn to, no medicine to ease your pain. It's just you, your warm beer, and the hope that your body will heal itself. So you grasp grasp your shovel, ignore the blisters, and keep digging. Your job isn't just a career. It's a relentless endurance test, a never-ending battle against the elements and the limitations of your own body. Now that you're back screaming from the labor, let's talk about the weather. In the Middle Ages, weather wasn't just seasonal, it was an ongoing punishment from the sky. Take winter. There's no insulation, no heating, no weatherproofing. Your house has wooden walls with gaps wide enough to throw a chicken through. The windows, just cloth, no glass. That fire in the hearth sounds cozy, except you don't have enough firewood. Wood costs money, and collecting it from the forest might get you executed. Yes, you heard that right. Picking up the wrong stick from the bad forest could be a capital offense. So you bundle up in your one damp wool tunic, huddle next to fading embers, and still wake up with a frozen nose. Your feet stay cold and wet for weeks. Your fingers go so numb they feel like tiny medieval popsicles. Frostbite, there's no diagnosis, it's just called bad luck. Do you think summer is better? Think again. Your home turns into a clay oven. There's no fan, no cross breeze, and no deodorant. You sweat through your layers but can't take them off. Showing too much skin is scandalous and also earns you a sunburn, bug bites, and harsh stares. Flies swarm your unwashed body, drawn to the scent of last week's goat stew fermenting in the corner. Mosquitoes buzz by your ear all night, assuming you can even sleep through your neighbors shouting and babies crying. In the fields, the sun cooks for you. No sunscreen, no proper hat, unless you've tied straw to your head like a desperate scarecrow. But you still have to work. Heat stroke? That's just taking a bad turn. So you're either shivering in your hut, hoping your toes survive the winter, or sweating through your one pair of socks while your thighs chafe like sandpaper. And the one constant, no matter the season, your clothes still itch, your food still leaves much to be desired, and your next miserable chore is always waiting. Welcome to Climate Control Medieval Edition. There isn't any. The stark contrast with our modern comforts is palpable. Feeling thirsty? Want to freshen up? Splash a little water on your face to snap out of this itchy nightmare. Too bad. In medieval times, water isn't your friend. It's a silent killer, a potential source of disease and death that you must approach with caution and fear. That stream near your village looks fresh and clear, like something out of a fairy tale. But surprise, someone just dumped a chamber pot upstream. And if it wasn't that, then a rotting pig might be floating just out of sight. The lack of proper waste disposal and sanitation means that every sip of water and every breath of air is a potential health risk. Every sip is loaded with parasites, bacteria, and the whole microbial army of medieval Europe. That's why everyone drinks beer, even kids. Before you imagine toddlers doing keg stands, understand it's called small beer. Weak in alcohol, strong on survival. Brewing it boiled the water, so it was safer than whatever flowed through the town ditch. If you were rich, you might drink wine instead. It tastes better, but also makes mornings harder, especially when you've got to harvest a field before noon. And what about bathing? Surely people used water for cleaning, right? In theory, yes. In practice, not. Back then, people believed bathing opened your pores and let disease sneak in. That's right, washing yourself was thought to be a health hazard. You were considered cleaner if you kept a thick, protective layer of grime glued to your skin. Communal bathhouses did exist, but they quickly became gossip hubs, scandal zones, and sometimes full-blown dens of medieval extracurricular activity. Naturally, the church stepped in and shut many of them down. Even if you wanted to bathe, it wasn't easy. You had to fetch water from a well, boil it over a fire, pour it into a leaky wooden tub, and then pray no one else in the house used it before or worse after you. As for rainwater, sure, it collects in barrels where birds poop, insects breed, and algae thrive. Refreshing, right? So whether it's going into your mouth, onto your body, or into your crops, water in the Middle Ages wasn't a life source. It's a gamble. One bad gulp and you're spending your final days sweating in a straw bed, clutching your stomach, and regretting all your life choice. Next time you sip tap water, raise a glass for the poor souls who didn't have it. Imagine a world where safe drinking water is a luxury. You're forced to drink from the same source that could be making you sick. Or worse, you're injured and in need of help, but the only option is a doctor from the Middle Ages. Unfortunately, it's the Middle Ages, and medicine here is just polite torture delivered by someone with a theology degree. Let's begin with the diagnosis. No matter what's wrong, cough, rash, broken bone, or full-blown plague, it's all blamed on your humors being out of balance. The four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, were the building blocks of medieval health. Keep them balanced and you're fine. Let them shift and you've turned into a lopsided bowl of internal soup. Got a fever? That's too much blood. The solution: bloodletting. That's right. They'll drain your veins with a dull blade or slap on a leech and call it treatment. And yes, barbers often did this. Imagine getting a trim and a blood draw in one sitting, a 2-for-1 special. Feeling depressed or anxious? You've got excess black bile. The fix? Laxatives. Maybe a herbal purge or just some prayers and a cold compress while your neighbors quietly measure you for a coffin. If you break a bone or suffer a nasty wound, you're in real trouble. There's no anesthesia unless you count passing out from the pain. Surgery tools haven't been cleaned since the last crusade. They're heated over fire not to sterilize them, but because it makes them look extra terrifying. Antibiotics? Centuries away. Germ theory? Doesn't exist. People think disease comes from foul air or because you committed some invisible moral offense. Got a stomach ache? That's on you. Must have had sinful thoughts. I hope you enjoy confessing while doubled over and puking. If things get worse, you'll be treated with more leeches, maybe some crushed beetles, and a priest at your bedside for last rites. At that point, they're preparing for the most reliable cure, death. And if, by some miracle, you survive, everyone thanks God. The doctor takes credit. The leech gets promoted. In the Middle Ages, medicine isn't about getting better. It's about surviving the cure. After a long day of work, lice, and medical guesswork, you finally head home. Your stomach growls. There's one comfort left: a warm meal. Bad news: that meal is probably a health hazard. Let's start with the basics. Food preservation is barely a concept. No refrigerator, no freezer. Just salt, smoke, or wishful thinking that cold air will keep things edible. Your meat, if you're lucky enough to have any, has been hanging for days, covered in flies, soaked in sketchy brine, and maybe shared with a rat or two. Bread is the staple of your diet, but it's not always safe. During bad harvests, people stretch it with bark, sawdust, or even clay. And if it's rye season, there's a bonus: ergot, a fungus that causes seizures, hallucinations, and sometimes death. It's like eating LSD with a side of tetanus. Vegetables are only available if they're in season. And you know what's always in season? Turnips. Endless turnips. Boiled, mashed, or floating in pottage. A mystery stew that's been bubbling in the same pot since your great-grandfather died. You might get fruit in autumn, but it spoils quickly. Sugar is rare, expensive, and hoarded by the wealthy as a flex, even as it rots their teeth black. Dairy? Another gamble. Milk spoils within hours. Butter and cheese last longer, but they're teeming with bacteria. Still, people eat them because the only alternative might be chewing your shoe. And seasoning? Forget it. Spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, or pepper are worth more than gold. Your idea of flavor? Onions, salt if you're lucky, and disappointment. Most meals taste like wet burlap seasoned with regret. But food isn't just a health hazard, it's political. Game animals? They belong to the local lord, not you. Caught poaching a rabbit? You could be fined, jailed, or even executed. That's right. Dinner can get you killed, so you sit down by the flickering fire to eat your gray stew, fully aware that every bite might be your last. But you eat anyway, because in the Middle Ages, food doesn't nourish, it challenges your will to live. Evening falls. You've worked, suffered, and forced down suspicious stew. Now you can rest. Not quite. Because God is watching, so is the priest. And so is your neighbor Agnes, who will rat you out if you skip Mass. In medieval Europe, religion isn't just part of life. It is life. The church controls your calendar, your laws, your education. If you can even read, your birth, your marriage, your death, and everything in between. It's like your spiritual landlord, and you're always behind on rent. Church bells mark every day, morning, noon, and night. Not to keep time, but to remind you to pray or else. Miss a bow? Sin. Eat meat on a Friday? Sin. Dream about your neighbor's wife? Double sin. And hell? Is genuine. Priests describe it in vivid detail. Rivers of fire, lakes of boiling blood, demons with pitchforks, and non-stop screaming. If the plague doesn't scare you, eternal damnation will. Don't bother reading the Bible for yourself. It's written in Latin, a language only clergy, monks, and that one noble kid who's never seen a shovel can understand. You rely entirely on the church to interpret God's will. So if your crops fail, and the priest says it's because you didn't pray enough, guess what? It's time to hit your knees harder. And tithes? Mandatory. You owe 10% of everything. Got wheat? Give wheat. Got chickens? Give eggs. Got nothing? Congratulations. You're not just spiritually exhausted, you're also financially ruined. Holidays? Those are holy days. There are dozens of them. And while they might give you a break from manual labor, they're not for fun. They're for attending Mass, fasting, confessing your sins, and remembering that joy is a suspicious indulgence. Questioning the church? Extremely risky. Heretics are burned, witches drowned, blasphemers flogged, and skeptics swiftly corrected. So, like everyone else, you go through the motions. You chant. You bow. You pray that after enduring this dirt-covered existence, your soul might reach paradise, assuming the priest thinks you deserve it. Because while God might be merciful, the medieval church isn't. And if you thought being a medieval peasant was rough, try doing it as a woman. Despite the added challenges of childbirth, obedience, and invisibility, women in the Middle Ages navigated life like playing on hard mode. No healing items, no safe points. Their resilience in the face of such adversity is truly inspiring. From birth, your path is set. Marry young, bear children, serve your husband, and die exhausted. Education? Unlikely unless you're noble and sent to a convent. For most girls, schooling ends once they learn how to churn butter and sew a tunic. Marriage comes early, really early. Getting betrothed at 12 and pregnant by 14 isn't unusual, and love has nothing to do with it. Marriage is about land, livestock, and alliances. Your opinion? Not needed. Once married, you're your husband's property. Your job is to have sons, run the household, feed everyone, and never complain. Because if you do complain, you could be labeled a nag or worse, a witch. And that label comes with a free drowning or burning, depending on regional trends. Childbirth in the Middle Ages was a brutal lottery, with no prenatal care, clean tools, or pain relief. Yet, women endured this, often surviving multiple births. Their strength and endurance command respect. Now you're in a lice-ridden hut, trying to nurse a screaming infant while still cooking, cleaning, and helping in the fields. There's no rest. You are the rest for everyone else. Unmarried women were viewed with suspicion, widows were vulnerable, and those who dared to speak their minds were considered dangerous. Yet, some women chose to defy these norms, often at the risk of being accused of witchcraft. Their courage is truly admirable. Even in the church, women had little standing. Nuns, for instance, lived under strict rules, no talking without permission, no going anywhere, and their spiritual rank was always below men. However, it's important to note that women played crucial roles in the church, often as caretakers, educators, and spiritual guides, despite their limited official standing. In short, if you're a woman in the Middle Ages, you're expected to obey, endure, reproduce, and suffer quietly, ideally with a smile. Yet, despite these overwhelming expectations, women often displayed remarkable resilience and strength, enduring their hardships with dignity and grace. So far, you've survived filth, hunger, injustice, and maybe a violent goat. Just when you think things can't get worse, here comes the violence, loud, bloody, and, by medieval standards, totally normal. This normal violence, which included domestic abuse, public executions, and street fights, was a constant threat to women's safety and well-being. Make no mistake, the Middle Ages are not peaceful. Law and order mostly means hoping your local lord isn't in a foul mood. Violence is everywhere, at home, in the streets, in religious disputes, even in line at the community bread oven. Crime is rampant. Punishment is brutal. Justice? It's more like a public performance than absolute protection. Steal a loaf of bread? You could lose your hand. Caught lying? Your tongue might get pierced. Is gossip too much? Meet the scold's bridle. A metal mask strapped to your head with a bar in your mouth for correction, of course. Accused of a serious crime, heresy, theft, witchcraft, you prove your innocence through torture. Welcome to trial by ordeal. One method, plunge your hand into boiling water to grab a stone. If your burn heals clean in 3 days, you're innocent. If not, guilty. Another, they toss you into a river. Sink, and you're innocent, but also dead. Float, and you're guilty and still in trouble. It's a medieval game show where the grand prize is survival, and the host wants you to lose. Sentenced to death? That's a public event. Hangings, beheadings, burnings, performed in front of cheering crowds. People even bring snacks. It's the Middle Ages version of weekend entertainment. Domestic violence? Accepted. Husbands were not just allowed, but expected to discipline their wives and kids. Street fights were common. You could be beaten just for giving a noble's horse the wrong look. And war? Always brewing. Local feuds, land disputes, religious crusades. There's always someone marching off to stab someone else in the name of God, honor, or sheer boredom. Violence isn't a failure of the system. It is the system. Everyone lives with the constant knowledge that life is short, justice is random, and your neighbor might club you to death over a pig. So you walk carefully, keep your head down, and never trust anyone holding a stick. At this point, you've survived lice, leeches, laundryless misery, and the ever-present threat of public execution. Now, we come to the inevitable ending for most people in the Middle Ages, an early, unremarkable death. If you're still breathing past age 40, congratulations, you're a local legend. People might even call you the Old One, not as a compliment, but because making it that far is statistically astounding. Let's look at the numbers. Average life expectancy was around 30 to 40 years, but that's mostly because so many children died young. Nearly half of all children didn't make it past the age of 5. Disease, starvation, or just one brutal winter could wipe them out. No vaccines, no antibiotics, no hope. If you survived childhood, you entered adulthood already worn down. You started working as soon as you could walk, and by 25, your joints creaked like the chapel door. You were missing a few teeth, a finger, and most of your enthusiasm for life. For women, childbirth was one of the leading causes of death. No painkillers, no trained doctors, just prayer, boiling water, and someone holding your hand as you bled out on a straw mattress. Men didn't have it easier, they just faced different threats. Farm injuries, infected cuts, violent neighbors, crusades gone wrong. Even a simple trip to the market could turn deadly if you bumped into the wrong tax collector or a bored highwayman. Religion played a significant role in helping individuals cope with these harsh realities, providing comfort and a sense of hope. Then there were the silent killers. Plagues sweeping through towns overnight, a famine that starved entire villages, or sheer bad luck, like eating rotten grain and spending your last hours hallucinating and screaming at walls. Funerals? You were lucky to get one. Bodies were buried fast to stop the spread of disease. No embalming, no fancy coffins, just a shallow grave, a few mumbled prayers, and maybe a patch of churchyard space, if there was any left. So yes, life in medieval Europe was harsh, short, and stalked by death in all its casual forms. You didn't retire, you just stopped showing up one day. And speaking of the final chapters, let's zoom out for a moment. How's your day been? You woke up in filth, relieved yourself in a bucket, brushed your teeth with wishful thinking, nearly fainted from hunger, worked until your spine screamed, scratched at itchy wool, prayed not to catch the plague, and narrowly avoided public execution for owning a squirrel. The lack of personal hygiene in the Middle Ages, due to the lack of modern comforts, was a stark contrast to the cleanliness we enjoy today, and it had a significant impact on health. Welcome to just one day in the Middle Ages. Still dreaming of being a knight? It's time to let that go. That romantic version of the era. Noble warriors, elegant ladies, epic battles, and grand feasts by candlelight is fiction. Fairy tales and fantasy novels have done a great job of polishing a filthy reality. In truth, the medieval world was a grim, brutal, and deeply unjust place. Your birth determined your fate. Born poor, you stayed poor. Born rich, lucky you, you might live a little longer. But even nobles weren't safe. One bad bowl of soup and you could end up with dysentery and a quick burial. Castles weren't cozy sanctuaries. They were cold, damp stone boxes full of fleas, smoke, and politically arranged marriages. Sure, you had a fur cloak and some wine, but also a 50% chance of dying from an infected scratch or a backstabbing cousin. So no, the simple life wasn't simple. It was relentless. Everything took longer. Everything hurt more. Even basic things like childbirth or chewing could kill you. Life wasn't about leisure, it was pure survival. And even if you did manage to steal a quiet moment to reflect or dream, what could you do with it? No upward mobility. No modern healthcare. No internet to ask, "What's this rash on my arm?" It's a stark reminder of the everyday struggles they faced and a call to empathize with their hardships. You lived, suffered, worked, and died, usually within 10 miles of where you were born. But here's the most astonishing part. Despite all of that, people still laughed. They sang. They told stories. They fell in love. They made meaning out of misery. Not because life was easy, but because humans are stubborn, resilient creatures. Their ability to find joy and meaning amid such hardship is a testament to their strength. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's always a way to let in the light. Even in the darkest times, they found ways to let in the light. So tonight, when you crawl into your clean bed, surrounded by heating, hot water, antibiotics, and a Wi-Fi signal, maybe whisper a quiet thank you. In the modern world, and to your ancestors who battled rats, hunger, and a brutal world so you wouldn't have to, their struggles have paved the way for the comforts and conveniences we enjoy today. It's a stark contrast to the relentless battle they faced and a reminder to appreciate the privileges we often take for granted. From a young age, Sophie learned to balance obedience with sharp cunning. She wasn't just a quiet, noble girl. She was a voracious reader, mastering several languages, and developed the skill to silently size up any room before speaking. A survival toolkit for the ruthless world ahead. These skills would prove essential once she entered one of Europe's most brutal courts. When Empress Elizabeth Petrovna of Russia began searching for a bride for her heir, Grand Duke Peter, she looked beyond Russia's borders. Peter himself was of German descent, and Elizabeth wanted a foreign bride. Someone pliable, grateful, and easy to control. Sophie fit that description perfectly. Noble bloodline, Lutheran faith, which she'd have to abandon, and a reputation for grace and humility. At just 14, Sophie was summoned to Russia. In 1744, she arrived in the freezing capital of St. Petersburg, draped in thin German fabrics and carrying a diplomatic smile. Though inside, she was ready to play a different game. Her mother, a cold and calculating social climber, pushed her forward like a pawn. But Sophie had her ambitions. To survive and thrive in Russian high society, she converted to Orthodox Christianity, taking the name Ekaterina Alexeyevna, Catherine. The conversion ceremony was a public, symbolic, and life-changing event. This wasn't just about religion. It was a complete burn of her old identity, a step into a foreign empire with no path back. No one watching that quiet teenage girl in her fur-trimmed coat could have guessed the storm she was about to unleash. Betrayal, revolution, enlightenment, and empire. From the moment she set foot in the Russian court, Sophie stopped being a pawn. She began plotting how to become a queen. Catherine's marriage to Grand Duke Peter was meant to secure her position in Russian royalty, but it felt more like a cage than a crown. Peter was not the dashing prince of fairy tales. Awkward, immature, and obsessed with toy soldiers, he cared more about war games in his chambers than ruling or even showing affection. Some accounts say he refused to consummate their marriage for years. He idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia and resented the Russian court that had adopted him. Meanwhile, Catherine embraced Russia with fierce determination. She learned the language, studied its history, and memorized Orthodox rituals. She wanted to belong. Peter wanted to escape. This mismatch wasn't just personal, it was political. The Russian court was a viper's nest of gossip, paranoia, and brutal power plays. Empress Elizabeth still held absolute power but was in declining health. Everyone knew change was coming, and everyone had an agenda. Catherine was watched constantly. Her letters were read, friendships monitored, and every move scrutinized. She couldn't trust her husband, her mother whispering on behalf of foreign powers, or even her servants. In this dangerous environment, alliances turned to accusations overnight. But Catherine was no fool. She learned to play the court's deadly game quietly, cultivating allies in the shadows. She charmed military officers, befriended scholars, and earned a reputation for dignity and restraint, a sharp contrast to her husband's childish tantrums and open contempt for Russian traditions. Behind closed doors, Catherine devoured the works of Enlightenment thinkers such as Voltaire and Montesquieu. While others saw her as a mere consort, she was quietly building a vision, not just for herself, but for Russia, a nation of strength, education, and reason. But there was a problem. The longer Peter lived, the longer Catherine remained trapped, powerless as a wife to a man unfit to rule. So she bided her time, observed the court's dynamics, and meticulously planned her next move. She understood that the Russian throne wouldn't be inherited, it would have to be seized. In 1762, after nearly 2 decades of patient maneuvering, Catherine's moment arrived. Empress Elizabeth passed away and Peter, now Peter III, ascended to the throne as Tsar. But his reign was a swift descent into chaos. In mere months, Peter alienated the church, insulted the nobility, mocked the army, and praised Prussia, Russia's bitter enemy. He reversed key policies, humiliated the clergy, and openly spoke of divorcing Catherine to marry his mistress. The court, already wary of Peter's erratic behavior, turned cold. The army, loyal to Catherine, grumbled. Ordinary Russians saw him as a foreign puppet mocking their traditions. Catherine watched it all unfold and made her move. In July 1762, while Peter was away at his summer palace, Catherine launched a bloodless coup. Supported by key military officers, including her lover Grigory Orlov and his powerful brothers, she rode through St. Petersburg in full imperial regalia and was proclaimed Empress Catherine II. The powerful imperial guard pledged allegiance. Peter, caught off guard and without allies, surrendered within days. He was taken into custody and soon found dead under mysterious circumstances. Officially, the story went that Peter III died of hemorrhoidal colic, a painful but natural cause. Unofficially, everyone knew it was murder. Quiet, calculated, and necessary. Catherine was now empress, not by birthright, not by marriage, but by sheer will, razor-sharp wit, and bold audacity. This was unprecedented. A foreign-born woman with no legitimate claim had seized the Russian throne without a single battle fought. Yet, this dramatic ascent was only the beginning. Her real challenge was to turn this daring power grab into something lasting, a legacy that would outlive her and cement her rule. Would Russia, a sprawling and often unruly empire, accept her? Would the powerful nobility, who guarded their privileges jealously, respect her authority? Could she hold together this immense and fractious empire without succumbing to the same fate as her husband? Catherine's strategic thinking was at play here, as she foresaw the potential obstacles and planned her moves accordingly. Catherine knew well that power won through intrigue was fragile. It could be snatched away just as easily. She realized that to stay in power, she couldn't be just a schemer. She had to become a visionary ruler. Thus began Catherine's transformation, from a cautious conspirator to a reforming empress who would redraw borders, embrace Enlightenment ideas, and redefine what it meant to be a woman wielding absolute power. Once crowned, Catherine could have rested on her laurels, content to enjoy the throne. But that was never her style. She had far bigger ambitions than simply sitting on a gilded chair. Her ambition was a driving force, constantly inspiring her to strive for more. She wanted to transform Russia, not just its armies or its politics, but its entire intellectual and cultural landscape. While her husband had worshipped Frederick the Great and played with toy soldiers, Catherine idolized Voltaire, Diderot, and the bold thinkers of the Enlightenment. She believed in reason, progress, and education, and that a monarch's role was to serve the people, though she ruled with absolute authority. Catherine's engagement with Enlightenment philosophy was not just for show. She lived it. For over 15 years, she corresponded directly with Voltaire, flattering him while defending her autocratic rule. This correspondence was not just a personal interest but a reflection of her commitment to Enlightenment ideals. She invited Diderot to her court, bought his entire library to support him financially, and behind palace walls, she pored over legal texts, debated reforms, and crafted policies to modernize Russia. Her early reign was marked by ambitious attempts to codify Russian law. In 1767, she formed the Legislative Commission, a bold project aiming to rewrite the entire legal code of the empire. Her own nakaz or instruction was a political manifesto in disguise, calling for equality before the law, condemning torture, and declaring that rulers must serve the common good. For an 18th-century Russian empress, Catherine's embrace of Enlightenment ideals was revolutionary. However, these ideals confronted harsh realities in Russia, a vast, feudal, and deeply conservative land ruled by nobles who fiercely guarded their control over serfs. Catherine understood she had to move carefully, balancing her progressive vision with the need to maintain the loyalty of the powerful nobility. She abolished some forms of torture, expanded secular education, and built schools and libraries. Yet, she reaffirmed the nobility's power over their serfs, ensuring their loyalty remained intact. This was her delicate balancing act, being a philosopher queen in public and a practical empress in private. She walked a razor's edge between ideals and survival, between the elegant salons of Paris and the brutal politics of Moscow. This balancing act underscores the complexity of her rule and the challenges she faced. Her vision for Russia was daring but calculated. Catherine wasn't trying to turn Russia into a carbon copy of Europe. She wanted to make it modern on her terms. Reform, yes, but wielded with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. She was not content to reform Russia from within. She aimed to expand it outward, forging an empire that would inspire fear, admiration, and envy. Where Peter the Great had cracked a window to the west, Catherine intended to tear down the walls. Under her reign, Russia's borders stretched wider than ever. She waged wars not only to defend her crown but to reshape Europe's map. One of her most notable campaigns was against the Ottoman Empire. These wars, fought in waves throughout the 1760s and 1770s, were not just about land, they were about influence. Catherine saw herself as the liberator of Orthodox Christians under Muslim rule and the rightful protector of Eastern Europe. Under generals like Alexander Suvorov and Grigory Potemkin, Russia captured key territories, including Crimea, the northern coast of the Black Sea, and critical warm water ports that Russian Tsars had coveted for generations. These victories weren't just military, they were deeply symbolic. With every conquest, Catherine sent a clear message. Russia was no longer a distant, backward cousin of Europe. It was now a continental powerhouse. She also turned her gaze westward. Through shrewd diplomacy and strategic alliances, Catherine participated in the partitions of Poland, dividing the fragile Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth with Austria and Prussia. By the final Third Partition in 1795, Poland vanished from the map. Russia gained vast new territories and millions of new subjects. But Catherine didn't just conquer with armies. She colonized with ideas. New cities rose. Trade routes expanded. German settlers were invited to cultivate Russian farmland. The empire became a vast mosaic, stretching from the icy Baltic Sea to the sun-drenched shores of the Black Sea. Through every conquest and reform, Catherine remained the central force guiding her empire's destiny. Reports flowed constantly to her desk. She issued orders with precision and personally reviewed every major decision. There was no part of Russia's expanding borders she didn't try to understand and influence. Critics, then and now, have accused her of being power-hungry, even imperialistic. But Catherine didn't see it that way. To her, expansion wasn't personal ambition. It was Russia's rightful destiny. She believed that a great ruler wasn't measured only by lofty ideals but by how far their borders reached. She didn't just aspire to rule Russia, she aimed to revolutionize it. Her vision was to shape it into a grand, enlightened civilization, feared by its enemies, respected by its neighbors, and loyal to her. Despite her strategic brilliance and undeniable authority, Catherine the Great was equally notorious for what transpired behind closed doors, and not the ones lined with books and maps. Her private life became one of the most scandalous and talked about elements of her reign. Catherine had lovers, many of them, not a few discreet affairs hidden in shadow, but a series of carefully chosen companions, often young, handsome, and occasionally quite influential. These were not just fleeting romances. They were arrangements. She rewarded her favorites generously. Titles, land, pensions. If they pleased her, they thrived. If they didn't, they were dismissed quietly, sometimes with a medal, sometimes with a promotion, and always with a gracious farewell. Among her many lovers, one man stood out, Grigory Potemkin. He was more than a companion. He was a political partner, a military strategist, and perhaps even, as some historians speculate, her secret husband. Their bond defied traditional labels. It was a blend of passion, loyalty, and shared ambition. Together, they orchestrated military campaigns, colonized new territories, and reshaped southern Russia, leaving a mark that would endure long after their lifetimes. Yet European courts and commentators couldn't look past the scandal. Satirical pamphlets mocked her relentlessly. Gossip accused her of being insatiable, reckless, and even unfit to rule. After her death, the stories only got more grotesque, the most infamous being a completely false and cruel tale involving a horse, invented purely to disgrace her legacy. But why the fixation on her private life? The answer is straightforward. Catherine was a woman who wielded power boldly and unapologetically. In an era when female rulers were expected to be either virtuous saints or tragic widows, she refused to be pigeonholed. She lived, loved, and ruled on her terms, and that made her all the more formidable. Ironically, while her enemies called her immoral, Catherine had a remarkably thoughtful view of love and sexuality. She believed pleasure was a natural part of life and that personal relationships, when properly managed, didn't compromise a ruler's effectiveness. Unlike many male monarchs who mixed emotion with governance to disastrous effect, Catherine kept the two separate. Her lovers were often chosen for their usefulness as much as their looks. These liaisons were strategic. They created bonds of loyalty, surrounded her with capable men, and helped her maintain control in a male-dominated court. And when the relationship had run its course, she ended it with charm and generosity. Far from weakening her, Catherine's love life became one more instrument of her power, an extension of her intellect and charisma. But her reign wasn't all salons and strategy. In 1773, a darker test of her rule emerged, one that would shake her to the core. It came not from foreign armies, but from within Russia itself. A bearded Cossack named Yemelian Pugachev appeared, claiming to be Peter III, Catherine's long-dead husband. According to him, he had survived the coup and returned to reclaim his throne. The claim was absurd. Peter was long dead, but to Russia's exhausted peasants, desperate serfs, and disenfranchised Cossacks, Pugachev's story didn't need to be true. It just needed to offer hope. He promised liberation from serfdom, lower taxes, and land ownership for the ordinary people. His message ignited the steppes, spreading like wildfire across the Volga River region and beyond. Discontented peasants, old believers, and Cossacks rallied to his cause. At a time when the chasm between nobles and serfs had never been wider, Pugachev's promises felt like salvation. What followed was the largest peasant uprising in Russian history. Towns fell, fortresses surrendered, nobles were executed. For a moment, it looked like the empire itself might unravel. Catherine was rattled. This wasn't a diplomatic crisis. It wasn't a war she could resolve with treaties or well-placed bribes. It was a rebellion of her people against the very system she upheld. But she didn't freeze. She acted. With swift and brutal force, she sent trained military units to crush the revolt. By 1774, Pugachev's army was in ruins. He was captured, paraded in an iron cage, and publicly executed in Moscow, a bloody warning to anyone who might dream of revolution. The rebellion changed Catherine. It was a turning point. Her earlier dreams of ending serfdom were quietly set aside. The Enlightenment ideals she once championed now took a back seat to the need for stability and control. She leaned more heavily on the nobility, reinforcing their privileges to secure their loyalty. In exchange, they received near-total control over their serfs. The rebellion changed Catherine. It was a turning point. Her earlier dreams of ending serfdom were quietly set aside. The Enlightenment ideals she once championed now took a back seat to the need for stability and control. She leaned more heavily on the nobility, reinforcing their privileges to secure their loyalty. In exchange, they received near-total control over their serfs. The empress who once quoted Voltaire and spoke of justice now prioritized order above all else. Reforms slowed. Surveillance tightened. The mere whisper of dissent was met with iron-fisted suppression. Pugachev had lost his head, but the fear he unleashed never left Catherine's mind. She had learned a brutal lesson. Power built on inequality could not endure forever without resistance. And that resistance, if allowed to grow, could threaten everything she had built. By the final years of her reign, Catherine the Great had ruled for more than 3 decades. Longer than any woman in Russian history. She had seized power in a coup, expanded the empire's reach across continents, reformed its institutions, and challenged every expectation placed on her as a woman and a monarch. And in doing so, she didn't just leave behind a transformed Russia. She left behind a legacy that would echo across history. Under Catherine's reign, Russia emerged as a true European power. Not just in military strength, but in influence, reach, and ambition. The empire expanded by over 200,000 square miles, incorporating Crimea, significant portions of Poland, and extensive stretches of the Black Sea coastline. These weren't random land grabs. They were calculated moves, securing vital warm-water ports, opening new trade routes, and positioning Russia as a dominant force in both Europe and Asia. But Catherine's legacy wasn't only etched in borders. She left an indelible mark on Russia's cultural soul. Under her patronage, the Hermitage Museum was born, and with it, one of the most impressive art collections in all of Europe. She corresponded with Enlightenment philosophers like Voltaire and Diderot, not just as a monarch, but as an intellectual peer. Her court became a beacon of refinement and sophistication, a place where art, science, and philosophy flourished. In a country that Western Europe often dismissed as backward, Catherine placed Russia firmly at the center of the cultural conversation. She also took bold steps to modernize the education system. Schools for girls were founded, an extraordinary move for the time. She promoted the expansion of printing presses and the circulation of books, thereby satisfying Russia's insatiable hunger for knowledge. She even embraced science with rare courage, undergoing smallpox inoculation herself in a public display of trust in medicine, an act that saved countless lives and set a precedent for public health. Yet, for all this progress, her reign was filled with contradictions. Catherine admired Enlightenment ideals, but when it came to serfdom, the brutal system binding millions of Russians to the land, she not only upheld it but allowed it to spread deeper into new territories. Her reforms, while impressive on the surface, were often limited in scope. They polished the empire's exterior without dismantling the inequality at its core. Still, Catherine brought something invaluable: stability paired with ambition. She understood that power wasn't something passed down. It was earned, seized, protected, and constantly renegotiated. She ruled not through divine right, but through brilliance, charisma, and relentless political strategy. She was called many things by her contemporaries: manipulative, ruthless, seductive, visionary. But above all, She was effective, inspiring us with her unwavering determination. When she died in 1796, Catherine left behind a Russia that was bigger, stronger, and wealthier than it had been in generations. The throne was secure, the empire vast, and the myth of Catherine the Great fully formed. She didn't just rule. She redefined what rulership could look like, blending intellect and authority with unapologetic control. In the end, she was more than an empress. She was a symbol, a woman who reshaped history in her image. Yet beneath the imperial grandeur, Catherine remained keenly aware of her precarious place. She hadn't been born Russian. She wasn't handed the throne. She took it in a coup, and she ruled an empire in which many still bristled at the idea of a woman in command. That knowledge never left her. She worked constantly, read obsessively, and governed as if her authority could disappear if she stopped for even a moment. Her daily life was a storm of responsibility. Hours of reading reports, drafting legislation, managing foreign alliances, and navigating the minefield of court politics. She didn't just occupy the throne. She bent it to her will, leading like someone born to power, even though she had to carve it out for herself. Despite her grandeur, Catherine often found herself isolated, surrounded by flatterers, lovers, and courtiers. She admitted in her memoirs that few around her could truly be trusted. Her son, Paul, was one such source of worry. She distrusted his judgment and kept him far from affairs of state, fearing that once he took the crown, everything she had built might unravel. And then there was Grigory Potemkin, her greatest emotional and political partner. Though their romantic relationship faded, their bond endured as deep friendship and collaboration. His death in 1791 devastated her in a way she never publicly admitted. Catherine understood the power of image. She was a master of narrative, presenting herself as the mother of her people, the enlightened monarch, the warrior empress, and the champion of the arts. But behind the performances was a woman who had survived rejection, betrayal, scandal, and revolution. And through it all, she continued to move forward, inspiring us with her strength and determination. When she died, she left behind an empire transformed, but also a legacy filled with questions. Could she have gone further in freeing the serfs? Had she sacrificed too many ideals in the name of order? Was she a reformer who compromised, or a ruler who dreamed too cautiously? These questions prompt us to engage in thoughtful reflection on her reign. History gave her the title she never claimed for herself, the Great, not because she was universally beloved, but because she took power on her terms, and wielded it in a world where women weren't supposed to wield any at all. Catherine didn't just wear the crown. She redefined what it meant to earn one. She was buried in silence. No name, no glyphs, no inscription to tell her story. Yet her tomb spoke volumes. One of the wealthiest female burials ever discovered in Mesoamerica. And still, she remains an enigma. Wrapped in mystery and red powder, she was unlike anyone else found at Palenque. Was she a queen, a high priestess, or perhaps the consort of the famed ruler Pacal the Great? No one knows for sure. So, the archaeologists gave her a name that matched the haunting aura of her resting place. The Red Queen. The mystery of her true identity continues to captivate us. She lived during the 7th century, the golden era of Palenque, a time of monumental architecture, cosmic kingship, and ritual grandeur. And yet, unlike many Maya tombs, hers had been hidden away, undisturbed, sealed, and purposefully isolated. This wasn't just a burial, it was a profound spiritual statement. Her memory wasn't meant to live on through written words. It was preserved through ritual, through color, and through the powerful silence she left behind. The most unforgettable element of her tomb wasn't the jade jewelry or even the sealed sarcophagus. It was the dust that covered it. A thick coating of powdered cinnabar, brilliant red and dangerously toxic, covered everything. Her bones, the stone walls, the offerings, the very air. It clung like blood to every surface. In Maya culture, this was no accident. Cinnabar, made from mercury sulfide, was both sacred and feared. It was used sparingly, reserved for the most divine of rituals. To the Maya, red wasn't just a color, it was a force. It symbolized blood, rebirth, and the energy that linked the human world to the divine. It represented sunrise, sacrifice, and the eternal cycle of life emerging from death. Coating the body in red powder wasn't mere decoration. It was a transformation, a spiritual preparation, not for immortality, but for transcendence. Death, in Maya belief, wasn't an end. It was a passage, a journey through layers of the underworld called Xibalba, a realm filled with gods, tests, and shadows. The Red Queen wasn't just laid to rest. She was being prepared for ascension. But there's a chilling twist. Cinnabar is lethally toxic. Prolonged exposure can cause hallucinations, madness, and death. The Mayans may not have understood the chemistry, but they respected its danger. To bury someone in cinnabar was to say that this person was not ordinary. It was a declaration of divinity. Very few in Palenque were given this treatment. One was Pakal the Great, the legendary king. His tomb, like hers, was drenched in cinnabar. That single detail has sparked decades of speculation. Could she have been his queen? His mother? A ruler in her own right? Her skull had been gently placed atop a jaguar pelt, a symbol of power, royalty, and the underworld. Surrounding her were sacred objects. Bone needles, obsidian blades, jade figurines, artifacts hinting at rituals performed in her name or by her hand. These weren't casual burial goods. They were sacred tools chosen with deep meaning. Every detail of her tomb tells a story without words. It is a story of profound reverence, secrecy, and transformation. This was a woman of power, cloaked in ritual, surrounded by mystery, prepared for a journey beyond this world. The solemnity of the occasion is palpable in every artifact and every detail. All around her, offerings waited in solemn silence. Necklaces of polished jade, heavy, cold, luminous even after 1,300 years underground, lay across her chest and wrists. Jade wasn't just a luxury. To the Maya, it was life itself, the breath of the gods, the essence of the jungle, the green of maize. Only the elite, the sacred, and the chosen were buried in jade. And the Red Queen was covered in it. The most haunting object of all was the jade mask resting on her face. Unlike the golden masks of Egypt, this one was delicate, made of dozens of tiny jade tiles shaped to mirror her features. It wasn't about opulence. It was about identity, protection, and presenting her to the gods as eternal, divine, and whole. More clues were scattered nearby. A finely carved bone pin, its markings faded but deliberate, perhaps once bore her name or a sacred title. Ceramic vessels lay sealed around her feet, likely filled with offerings. Food, drink, incense. Provisions for the dangerous journey into the afterlife. To the Maya, death was not rest. Travel required sustenance. Her tomb feels intensely personal, not excessive, not theatrical, but deliberate. There was no gold, no chariots, no empty pomp. Only items chosen with care, with purpose. Each one was part of a spiritual map, guiding her soul to whatever waited beyond. Through this sacred burial, we glimpse a Maya understanding of death that wasn't about endings but about transitions, of power, of spirit, of status. The Red Queen wasn't buried to be forgotten. She was being readied to ascend, transformed by ritual and sanctified by color. And yet, for all her richness, she left behind a haunting absence. No name, no inscriptions, no record etched into stone. Only a legacy wrapped in red and silence. From the moment her tomb was opened, a tantalizing enigma reverberated through the annals of history. Who was the Red Queen? She was someone of immense importance. Her burial was too sacred, too rich, and too deliberate to belong to an ordinary noblewoman. Scholars quickly began piecing together the clues. The most compelling theory? She was Zakuk Jaw, the queen and consort of Kinich Jenab Pakal, better known as Pakal the Great, the most celebrated ruler of Palenque. Zakuk wasn't merely a royal wife. She was born into nobility and entered the ruling dynasty of Palenque as a young bride. She bore multiple sons, all of whom rose to positions of power, and she played a significant ceremonial role during Pakal's reign. If any woman deserved to be entombed in such ritual majesty, it was her. Supporting this theory is the tomb's location, just a few feet from the Temple of the Inscriptions, where Pakal himself was laid to rest. This proximity feels deliberate, suggesting a cosmic pairing. King and queen, united even in death. The closeness of their tombs symbolizes their eternal bond and shared destiny. Then there's the cinnabar. Only 2 tombs at Palenque were found saturated with the sacred red powder, Pokal's and hers. That's no coincidence. And yet, the mystery lingers. DNA testing was carried out, comparing her remains to Pakal's. The results were inconclusive. She wasn't his mother. No direct maternal link could be found. But that doesn't rule out marriage. After all, spouses aren't bound by blood. Some scholars propose that she might have been Zakuk, Pakal's formidable mother, who ruled as queen regent before he came of age. Others suggest she may have been a high priestess, a sister, or a forgotten ancestor. But the most substantial evidence still points to Zakuk, a queen by title, a mother of kings, and a sacred partner to one of the greatest rulers of the classic Maya world. And maybe the absence of her name wasn't a mistake. It may have been intentional. In Maya spirituality, identity didn't need to be carved in stone. It lived on through ritual, through color, and through the memory carried by the earth itself. So, the Red Queen remains suspended in the space between myth and memory. A woman of immense influence remembered not through glyphs or monuments, but through scarlet dust and sacred silence. To understand the Red Queen is to understand the world she inhabited. A world where Maya women held more authority than history has often acknowledged. In Maya politics, royal women were far from passive. They were central figures, diplomats, priestesses, power brokers. They orchestrated rituals, funded temple constructions, and played a crucial role in securing dynastic legitimacy. Their influence extended beyond the domestic sphere, shaping the political and religious landscape of the Maya civilization. Their bloodlines were not only sacred, they were strategic. Marriages forged alliances. Children extended claims to power. The lineages of women stitched together the very fabric of Maya rule. Marriage was not just a personal union but a political and social contract that strengthened the position of both partners and their respective lineages. Take Zakuk, for example, Pakal's mother. When the throne of Palenque sat vacant, she didn't simply wait. She ruled. As queen regent, she issued royal decrees, oversaw architecture projects, and held court until her son was old enough to take the crown. Without her leadership, Pakal's legendary reign might never have happened. And she wasn't alone. Across the Maya world, in Yaxchilan, Naranjo, and Calakmul, inscriptions reveal that women led rituals, made political decisions, and occasionally engaged in warfare. They appear in stele and murals dressed in full regalia, standing beside kings or, sometimes, above them. Their names were once known until they weren't. Centuries later, when the Spanish arrived, they brought a worldview that saw women as secondary figures. Over time, that lens distorted our view of Maya history. However, archaeology tells a different story, one of shared power, negotiated roles, and queens who left their mark not through conquest but in sacred tradition. Viewed in this perspective, the Red Queen transcends her mysterious burial. She emerges as a potent emblem of concealed power. Her tomb, nestled so near to Pakal's, hints not just at proximity but at equality. Her jade mask wasn't just a thing of beauty. It was a spiritual shield, a badge of status, of identity safeguarded for the gods. Her lineage might have been the linchpin of Palenque's dynasty. In Maya belief, queens weren't just spouses. They were custodians of sacred lineage, voices in cosmic ceremonies, and bridges between the mortal and divine. The Red Queen may be nameless to us, but in her world, she was never voiceless. And her burial wasn't simply about honor. It was about architecture, cosmology, and transformation. Her tomb wasn't just a resting place, it was a portal. She was discovered in Temple 13, a smaller pyramid in the heart of Palenque. While modest in size compared to Pakal's Temple of the Inscriptions, its location holds deep symbolic significance. These temples weren't placed randomly. Their positions aligned with the stars, dynastic myths, and spiritual significance. Inside Temple 13 was something precious. A sealed crypt, untouched by looters, preserved for over 1,000 years. It was built deep within the temple's core, hidden behind stone and time, accessible only by a steep, narrow passage. And within it, the Red Queen waited, not forgotten, but transfigured. A queen not carved in glyphs but etched in ritual and remembered by the scarlet dust that clung to her bones. The descent into the Red Queen's tomb is not just an archaeological act. It's a symbolic passage, a ritual journey into the Maya underworld. Sealed for over 1,130 years, the chamber is austere, constructed from cut stone, its silence profound. There are no murals, no glyphs, no stories etched into the walls. Yet, the sheer magnitude of this silent space is awe-inspiring. But that silence is the message. This was not a space meant to be read by the living. It was meticulously designed for transformation, a sacred cocoon for the soul's metamorphosis, reflecting the profound depth of Maya beliefs and practices. At the heart of the chamber rests her limestone sarcophagus, positioned like an altar. Its shape and material echo the grand tomb of Pakal the Great, just next door. But where Pakal's lid is carved with visions of cosmic rebirth, the Red Queen's burial is more subtle, inwardly focused, devoted to the body, the cinnabar, and the rituals of death themselves. Yet the architecture whispers with meaning. The tomb is aligned east to west, mirroring the sun's daily journey from dawn to dusk, from life into death. The space is compact but powerful, deliberate, sacred, and intimate. Like all Maya temples, it served as more than a monument. It was a cosmological instrument, a bridge between sky, earth, and the realm of spirits. To be buried inside such a temple was to be elevated beyond mortality. The Red Queen's resting place wasn't chosen at random. It was a sacred vessel designed to guide her from the world of the living into a divine continuum. Her bones rest in stone. Her essence is in red. Her legacy is not spoken in words but embedded in architecture. A temple that speaks in silence, a place of immense significance in Maya culture. To the ancient Maya, death wasn't an end. It was a threshold, a gateway into the underworld known as Xibalba. And for someone of her stature, the journey was far more than personal. It was cosmic, political, and deeply ritualized. The underworld, as described in Maya mythology, was no peaceful afterlife. It was a perilous maze of darkness, rivers of blood, deadly trials, and gods of death who tested every soul. Only those properly buried, spiritually prepared, and ritually honored could hope to survive the journey. The Red Queen's burial was nothing less than elite. Her body was dusted in cinnabar, sealed in stone, and surrounded by ritual offerings. But there's more. Obsidian blades and bone needles found in her tomb may point to auto-sacrifice. Either acts she once performed or rituals reenacted at her death to empower her spirit. These weren't just tools. They were spiritual symbols. Her jade mask, carefully assembled from individual tiles, wasn't merely ornamental. It may have functioned as a vessel of the soul, preserving her face for the gods to recognize. In Maya belief, the face was a mirror of the spirit, a passport to the afterlife. The surrounding ceramic vessels likely held sacred sustenance. Chocolate, maize, water, or pulque, gifts to nourish her in the next world. Stingray spines, Shell trumpets and other items may have symbolized tools for spiritual communication, calls to the gods, echoes of her earthly rituals. For the Maya, burial was not farewell. It was a transformation. Death was the seed, burial the planting, and the afterlife a rebirth into the divine. Kings and queens were seen as incarnations of gods in life, and in death, they were believed to return to their celestial origins. The Red Queen, anointed in red, buried in a pyramid, and honored with sacred offerings, was not merely laid to rest. She was prepared for ascension, not as a woman of flesh and blood, but as a being intertwined with the cosmic order. Her burial marked not the close of her story, but the beginning of her legend. Just steps away from her tomb lies one of the greatest burials in Mesoamerican history, that of Kinich Jenab Pakal, entombed within the Grand Temple of the Inscriptions. His resting place is renowned for its size, artistry, and deep spiritual symbolism. However, the Red Queen's tomb holds its profound mystery, not just in what was placed inside it, but also in where it was placed. Her sarcophagus was found within Temple 13, directly adjacent to Pakal's massive temple. In a city like Palenque, where temples were aligned with celestial and spiritual precision, such closeness speaks volumes. It was no accident. It was intentionally carved into stone, possibly to symbolize their eternal connection or to ensure their spiritual journey was intertwined. Many scholars believe the Red Queen was Zakukajah, Pakal's queen and sacred partner. While her tomb lacks inscriptions, the parallels to Pakal's burial are striking. Both cloaked in cinnabar, both entombed in pyramids, both surrounded by jade and reverence. This potential identity adds a layer of personal and political significance to her burial. Their rituals mirror one another, two halves of a sacred story. Pakal's tomb depicts him descending into the world tree, symbolizing death and rebirth in a cosmic sense. The Red Queen's tomb does not hold any such carvings, but her symbolism lies not in images but in her very presence. If Pakal was the sun, descending nightly through the underworld to rise again, then the Red Queen may have been the moon, his feminine counterpart, cyclical, mysterious, and luminous in her own right. This comparison highlights the complementary roles of the king and queen in Maya culture, as well as their shared journey through life and death. Together, they form a sacred duality: sun and moon, king and queen, life and death, forever linked in stone, spirit, and sky, masculine and feminine, king and queen, sun and moon. In Maya cosmology, rulership was never a solitary force. It was relational, rooted in balance. Just as the universe demanded harmony, so too did the dynastic court. By placing the Red Queen beside Pakal, the Maya weren't simply honoring a royal couple. They were preserving a cosmic partnership. Their proximity in death reflects what may have been true in life. A queen not behind but beside her king, sharing not only power but purpose. Their tombs, side by side, offer no words, yet they speak volumes. Two beings shrouded in cinnabar and stone joined across eternity in one of history's most sacred silences. Her name may be lost, but the Red Queen of Palenque endures, not as an anonymous relic, but as one of the most mysterious and powerful women of the ancient world. Sealed for more than 1,300 years, her tomb now whispers across time, each discovery deepening the enigma. Who was she truly? No glyph bears her name, no stele recounts her life, and yet her burial, her rich offerings, her crimson-covered bones, all point to a woman of immense significance. Not merely a wife, not simply a consort, but a figure of spiritual authority, of dynastic power, of royal blood. The Red Queen's emergence challenges us to reconsider what we thought we knew. She is a reminder that women in the ancient Maya world were far from silent. They led rituals, they governed cities, they shaped legacies. While kings like Pakal have long stood in the spotlight, the Red Queen's reemergence shifts our gaze. reminding us that power flowed through queens, mothers, priestesses, and visionaries. Her role in challenging traditional narratives is not to be overlooked. Her true legacy isn't limited to jade beads or ceremonial masks. It lives in the conversations she sparked, among archaeologists, historians, artists, and storytellers. Every architectural decision, every ritual object, every trace of cinnabar was part of a deliberate act. Together, they form a message. This woman mattered. Her role in sparking interdisciplinary conversations is a testament to her enduring significance. And perhaps that is the most extraordinary part of her story. Not what we know, but what we still don't. The Red Queen teaches us that history is not just a ledger of facts. It's a living mystery, a collective desire to reach back, to understand, to feel. In that way, her legacy is still unfolding. She rests in red, the color of blood and sacrifice, of life and renewal. Her face, once hidden behind a jade mask, now gazes out through the lenses of science, art, and awe. She may be nameless, but she is no longer voiceless. She may be mysterious, but she is far from forgotten. The Red Queen ruled in life and death. She rules something greater, our imagination. Her tomb was sealed in stone. Her story was written in silence. And still, somehow, she speaks. The iron rail pierced through her left hip and tore out through her pelvis. Her spine fractured in 3 places. Her right leg shattered. Her foot was dislocated. Her ribs and collarbone were broken. Her shoulder was wrenched from its socket. Her abdomen violated by steel. Frida Kahlo was just 18 years old. Someone draped a borrowed coat over her mangled body. Another bystander noticed something strange. Her skin shimmered, not with blood but with gold dust spilled from a pouch she had been carrying. On impact, it had exploded, covering her wounded form in a layer of glittering ash. Beauty and tragedy fused. She was rushed to the Red Cross hospital, where surgery after surgery attempted to rebuild what had been destroyed. For weeks, she lay immobilized in a body cast, flat on her back, consumed by pain, infection, and the unraveling of her dreams. The future she'd imagined, of becoming a doctor, drifted further with each agonizing day. And yet, in that stillness, something began to awaken. Her father brought her brushes. Her mother suspended a special easel above her bed. A mirror was fixed to the canopy so she could see herself. And so, Frida began to paint, first out of boredom, then out of necessity. Her first subject, her reflection, because that was all she had. But this was no act of vanity. It was an act of survival. The trauma had crushed her body but unlocked a doorway into her inner world, a space where pain, memory, and identity converged into art. The girl who once dreamed of healing others had now turned to healing herself, one brushstroke at a time. Encased in plaster and steel, fighting for each breath, Frida began building a visual language uniquely her own, raw, intimate, and unflinching. She did not paint pretty things. She painted truth no matter how ugly. Her pain became her palette. Her body became her subject. Her soul became her message. "I paint myself," she once said, "because I'm so often alone and because I am the subject I know best." Her early works, small and often painted on tin or wood, drew from Mexican retablos, folk paintings that told stories of suffering and miracles. But Frida turned the tradition inward. She painted herself as wounded, pierced, bleeding, broken, but always alert, always watching, never a passive victim. In one piece, she's nailed like a martyr. In another, she floats in a barren dreamscape, tethered to a cracked column, her shattered spine rendered in metaphor. She wept in paint. She exposed her pain without shame, blending beauty, brutality, and even humor. With each work, she reclaimed her experience, her identity as a woman, as a body in rebellion, as a survivor in a world that tried to define her. But Frida wasn't just telling her story. She was inventing a new kind of visual language, one that blended Mexican folk traditions with surrealism, symbolism, medical imagery, and personal myth. Her canvases became sacred autopsies of the soul, steeped in color, culture, and confrontation. By the time she could walk again, painfully, haltingly, Frida was no longer the girl who wanted to wear a white coat. She was an artist, and her voice was unlike anything the world had ever seen. She took the worst moment of her life and turned it into the foundation of her creativity. Frida Kahlo didn't just paint her suffering. She made the world look at it. And in doing so, she elevated her pain into art as protest, as confession, as resurrection. In 1928, still healing, still creating, and only 21 years old, Frida met the man who would become the most passionate and complicated relationship of her life, Diego Rivera. He was twice her age and already Mexico's most renowned painter. Towering in both reputation and presence, Diego was a legend of Mexican muralism, known for vast, politically charged frescoes celebrating the working class. Frida had long admired his work. Now she wanted his opinion of hers. She marched into the Ministry of Education, interrupted him mid-mural, and asked bluntly, "Do I have talent?" He looked over her paintings and replied, "Yes, and not just to be kind." He saw in her something rare, a voice unfiltered and fierce, a fusion of rage, humor, pain, and originality. Their relationship was immediate and explosive. Frida once said, "I've suffered two major accidents in my life, one in which a streetcar knocked me down. The other was Diego." They married in 1929, a pairing so unlikely Frida's parents called it the union of an elephant and a dove. Diego, massive, famous, and notoriously unfaithful. Frida, sharp-witted, fiercely independent, already walking with a cane. Their marriage was a storm of creativity and chaos. Diego supported her work and championed her growth as an artist, but also betrayed her repeatedly, even with her sister, Cristina. Frida was devastated. In retaliation, she took lovers of her own, men and women, including rumored affairs with Leon Trotsky and Georgia O'Keeffe. They divorced in 1939, only to remarry a year later on different terms. This time, Frida kept her name, her money, her home, and her autonomy. Their second marriage was not about traditional romance. It was a creative alliance forged in mutual understanding. Despite the heartbreak, the betrayals, and the burns of love gone volatile, Diego remained a central force in Frida's life. Diego Rivera challenged Frida Kahlo. He hurt her, yes, but he also believed in her, as an artist, as a revolutionary, and as a woman with the power to redefine painting itself. Their relationship was anything but peaceful, yet it became the stuff of legend. In the 1930s, Frida followed Diego north to the United States, accompanying him on major mural commissions in San Francisco, Detroit, and New York. It was a journey that exposed her to the heart of American industrialism, its glimmering wealth, and the unsettling contradictions of capitalism. Frida, a proud Mexican nationalist, a communist, and a passionate admirer of indigenous traditions, found herself increasingly alienated by the opulence she saw, especially during the Great Depression, which ravaged the nation. In her letters, she mocked what she saw as a culture obsessed with money and image. She missed Mexico, its color, chaos, contradiction, and soul. While Diego covered factory walls with grand, politically charged murals, Frida turned inward. She created more minor, more intimate works on tin and canvas. Here, her style crystallized, emotional, surreal, unapologetically personal. It was during this period that she painted some of her most iconic self-portraits. But Frida didn't paint herself out of vanity. She painted herself to survive. Her art became a mirror and a lifeline. With her body in constant pain from her injuries, numerous surgeries, and a heartbreaking miscarriage in Detroit, she channeled her grief into her canvas. In these portraits, she was bleeding, broken, and exposed. Yet her face always remained stoic, direct, unflinching. In her haunting work, Henry Ford Hospital, Frida lies on a blood-stained bed, weeping, surrounded by floating symbols of her loss. A fetus, medical instruments, a cracked pelvis, and a snail. The image was brutal, visceral, and deeply honest. A painting that didn't just depict suffering but bled with it. When she returned to Mexico, Frida dove even deeper into her leftist beliefs. She and Diego opened their home to Leon Trotsky, who was then living in exile. She wore Tehuana dresses, traditional indigenous garments, not for fashion but as a political and cultural declaration. These dresses, with their bold colors and intricate embroidery, were a symbol of Frida's pride in her Mexican heritage and her rejection of Western standards of beauty. Everything about Frida's identity, her body, her clothes, her art, became a statement. While Diego painted revolutions in sweeping murals, Frida painted its cost: the fractured body, the burning mind, the unflinching gaze of the soul in crisis. Her works were not just a reflection of her physical pain, but also her emotional and psychological struggles. She became not just a painter of pain, but a painter of resistance, using her art to confront and challenge the societal norms and personal traumas that threatened to consume her. By the late 1930s, Frida was no longer just Diego Rivera's wife. She had become a force unto herself. Her return to Mexico marked a powerful transformation. At Casa Azul, her cobalt blue home in Coyoacán, she created a sanctuary brimming with contradiction and color. There, Aztec sculptures stood in the garden. Monkeys and parrots wandered freely. The walls were blazed with yellow and cobalt. It was a space infused with incense, mariachi music, and the layered textures of Mexican identity. The house wasn't just a home. It was an extension of her imagination. Surrounded by pre-Columbian artifacts, religious ex-votos, folk art, and revolutionary literature, Frida painted with renewed fire. She wore embroidered dresses, braided flowers into her hair, and immersed herself in a world where tradition met rebellion. This period marked a surge in creativity. Her works grew more symbolic, more intricate, and more politically charged. In the two Fridas, she portrayed her dual identity. One figure in European dress, her heart bleeding and exposed, the other in indigenous attire, strong, grounded, and composed. This painting is a powerful exploration of Frida's inner conflict, her struggle to reconcile her European and indigenous heritage, and the impact of her personal and political beliefs on her sense of self. It was a visual autobiography of loss, heritage, and inner division. In 1939, Frida exhibited in Paris, where modernists like Picasso, Breton, and Kandinsky praised her originality. Yet even among surrealists, Frida stood apart. When André Breton tried to claim her as a surrealist, she rejected the label. "They thought I was a surrealist," she said. "But I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my reality." That reality was unapologetically Mexican. Not a fantasy version, but a raw, pulsating landscape filled with blood, skeletons, hummingbirds, thorns, corn, and memory. Her art honored indigenous roots while exposing the traumas buried in the nation's history. However, as her artistic voice grew stronger, her health began to deteriorate. Frida endured a relentless parade of surgeries, infections, and pain. Her spine continued to collapse. Her right leg became riddled with disease. She would eventually undergo over 30 surgeries in her lifetime, many of them brutal, back-to-back ordeals. Often bedridden, encased in casts or confined in traction devices, she painted through it all. Sometimes propped up in bed, her torso cinched in steel corsets, her fingers gripped around the brush like a weapon. These paintings, born of agony, grew darker, sharper, more defiant. The metaphors faded. What remained was a stark honesty, a fiery passion, and a profound truth. With every canvas, Frida refused to hide. She turned her body's betrayal into an act of radical honesty. Frida Kahlo had returned to Mexico not to rest, but to rise. Through painting, politics, and the fierce embrace of her own identity, she reclaimed her power. Her suffering didn't silence her. It became her signature of defiance, a testament to her unyielding spirit. In the broken column, Frida Kahlo depicted herself split in two, her torso pierced with nails, her spine replaced by a shattered ionic column. Yet, her face remained serene, her gaze unwavering. Pain was not just her subject. It had become her constant companion, her adversary, her muse, but she stood firm against it. Her political fire also intensified. Frida officially joined the Mexican Communist Party, marched in demonstrations, wrote scathing letters, and condemned imperialism and injustice wherever she saw it. When her legs could no longer carry her, she appeared at protests in a wheelchair, proudly waving signs and chanting slogans, her voice unwavering even as her body weakened. In 1953, Frida was finally given her first solo exhibition in Mexico, a long overdue recognition. Doctors warned her she was too ill to attend, but Frida, ever defiant, refused to miss it. She arrived by ambulance, carried inside on a stretcher, and placed, still in her hospital bed, at the center of the gallery. Adorned in traditional dress, surrounded by her work, she greeted guests with tequila, laughter, and fire still dancing in her eyes. Her final works were both haunting and hopeful. In Marxism Will Give Health to the Sick, she portrayed herself in a steel corset, held protectively by the hands of Karl Marx as she banished symbols of oppression. Her last known painting was a still life of sliced watermelons, one wedge inscribed with the words, "Viva la vida," long live life. Even on the edge of death, Frida remained joyful, radical, and resolute. Frida's final paintings were more than self-portraits. They were acts of rebellion, painted through agony but signed with life, leaving a profound legacy that continues to inspire and resonate with audiences. On July 13, 1954, at just 47 years old, Frida Kahlo died in the same place she had been born, La Casa Azul, her beloved blue house in Coyoacán. The official cause was pulmonary embolism, but those close to her whispered of something more profound. A soul worn thin by years of pain, surgeries, and unrelenting struggle. Only days before, she had insisted on attending a protest against the CIA-backed coup in Guatemala, raising her clenched fist from a wheelchair. Revolution was her final heartbeat. Her last diary entry was brief but piercing. "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." Her funeral was held at Palacio de Bellas Arts, Mexico's most esteemed cultural institution. Her body, wrapped in the red flag of the Communist Party, lay in state as artists, revolutionaries, and loved ones mourned. Diego Rivera, heartbroken, called her the greatest love of his life, even though his betrayals had once nearly destroyed her. But in death, something remarkable happened. Frida refused to fade. At first, her name was mentioned only in art circles. Critics found her difficult to classify, too political for surrealism, too surreal for realism. But through the 1970s and 80s, as feminist scholars and activists began recovering forgotten voices, Frida's voice grew louder. She became more than a painter. She became a symbol of pain transformed into art, of feminism forged in fire, of Mexican identity honored without compromise, of queerness, disability, defiance, and truth. Her unibrow, her flower crown, her piercing gaze became iconic. Her diary became sacred. Her home is a museum. Her paintings, once dismissed as too strange or too personal, now hang in the world's most excellent galleries. Frida had spent much of her life in Diego Rivera's shadow, but in death, she stepped fully into her light. She left behind more than art. She left behind a mirror and dared us to look. Not with pity, not with fear, but with fire. Today, Frida's face is everywhere. On t-shirts, murals, dolls, memes, and posters. But her power lies not in her image but in what we see behind it. Frida never chased perfection. She didn't fit into categories. She wasn't conventional, and she never wanted to be. In a world obsessed with flawlessness, she gave us raw, chaotic, joyful, painful, and radiant realness. She made her difference her superpower, her disability, her queerness, her politics, her heritage, and turned it into art that shattered borders and transcended generations. Frida Kahlo is no longer just an artist. She is a global icon. For queer communities, she is a fearless bisexual trailblazer who lived openly in a time of silence. For women, she is a reminder that power doesn't ask for permission. For disabled creators, she proves that pain doesn't stop the brush. It sharpens it. For Mexico, she is a reclaimed daughter, fierce and folkloric, forever stitched into the national soul. Her works, like the two Fridas, Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird, and The Broken Column, are no longer just viewed. They are felt by anyone who has ever suffered and needed to turn that suffering into something sacred. Frida lived in the margins and turned them into center stage. She was contradiction incarnate, a communist in gold jewelry, a betrayed woman who loved again, a broken body with an unbreakable soul. And through it all, she painted not just with color, but with conviction. Frida Kahlo never asked to become a symbol. She told the truth about herself. And in doing so, she told the truth for millions who had never seen themselves reflected in art before. Now, when we see her face, we don't just see beauty. We see courage. We see color. We see resistance. We see Frida not gone but immortal.